Hi, welcome to Tag Arcade. And this is part 2 for our controller configuration script. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we want to do is to create a prefab so that we could have our controls shared between this screen and our configuration screen. So I'm just going to call this prefab card controls to match it with this one. So we're going to take our card controls into this prefab, and you'll see the box becomes a blue. That means that you created the prefab successfully. So let's go ahead and go and create a new scene. Well, let's save the scene first. Let's go ahead and create a new scene. And let's save this scene as, well, let's call this configuration. Okay. So in our configuration, let's go ahead and set up the GUI interface so that we could accept the inputs. So we're just going to get a few buttons out here. Let's go get our buttons, rotate this around, zoom out, and move it into view. Okay. So we'll just call this first button up. And let's go ahead and duplicate this a few times. One. Duplicate. And we need one more duplicate. Okay. So we call the first one up. Let's call the second one down. Then left. Right. And finally, NOS for nitrous oxide. And right now they're all stacked on top of each other, so let's go ahead and move each one down. And 4, or I guess 5. Okay, now I'm going to take all the text and duplicate those, drag them up to the top of the hierarchy, and move them over. So this would be my labels. And okay, let's go ahead and zoom in, and let's go label this something that's actually recognizable. So we'll say that's the NOS text. Which text is this? This is the right text. This is our left text. This is my down text. And finally, my up text. Once that's all squared away, let's go ahead and go to our controls, or not our controls. Let's go ahead and create a script so that we could change our controls. And we'll call the script config. So if you want, you could actually create an empty game object and attach the config script to it. For now, I'm just going to take the config script and just attach it to the canvas game object. And now we could go ahead and modify our canvas. Say no. Okay. So within our configuration game object, we need to be able to access those text buttons. So what I'm going to do is say public text button label, and it's automatically the text alignment. So in order to use the text field, I need to add in the using Unity engine dot UI so that I could go for the text object. So let's go wait for the script to update. Oh, I forgot my semicolon after the using, so I got an error message. Let's go back, make sure the error message goes away. And for our labels, I just need 5 of them. And I'm actually going to get the labels here. So that one's the up. Oops. Let's go back to canvas. Go up, down, left, right, and NAS. So yeah, there all says text, which doesn't really help me that much. So if we want, we'll do up text, down text, left text, right text, and this would be my NAS text. So now if we go to canvas, we have up, down, left, right, NAS. So we got all of them. Now, what do we want to do? Well, we first need the script to be able to modify our car control script. So, or not our car control script, but our control script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reopen our car moves function or class and copy these 2 lines, controls, car controls. So let's go ahead and paste that. And also car controls and this line so that we could sort of find our car control. And done. Now, what do we need to do? Well, we need to create a function. And what function should that be? So I'm just going to go create a function so that when any of those buttons are pressed, we would be able to remap our button presses. So I'm going to say button void remap. And it's going to take an action. So accept an integer, and I'm going to call it action. So what this does is I'm going to create a function called remap, and it's going to take an input, pretty much which action I'm going to remap, either the up action, down, left, right, or NAS. So in order to do this, we need to create more variables. So we need to get a variable to tell us or to hold the value of which controls or which action we want to change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the num type from the control. So if you're unfamiliar with that, in our control script, we have this enum type of button action. So we are going to say controls dot button actions, and what shall we call this? We'll call this remap action. Hit save. And why not? We'll just put it public, just so that we can sort of debug it. But, so when we press the remap button, we want to know, or we want to store which action we're going to remap into this variable, remap action. So we're going to say remap action equals action. So once again, it says we cannot implicitly convert it into a control button action. So to remedy that, we're going to take the type that we need and put it in parentheses. So we say parentheses controls dot button actions. So what does this actually do? Well, if we go to the canvas, we could see our remap action is going to be one of our actions. It's either going to be up, down, left, right, or NAS. So that's all this remap action variable does, is tell us which action are we trying to remap at this time. Now we need another variable to say whether or not we're in the remap stage. So we're going to say bool should remap. So here we're going to say remap equals false, because we're not remapping anything right now. And if I do want to remap something, oops, we gotta hit enter. So here, if I press the remap button, we'll say should remap equals true. Okay. So those are going to be our two functions. So let's go ahead and rig those up to our buttons. So let's go ahead and hit the plus sign for all of these. Actually, let's do it a little quicker. So let's highlight all of these. I'm going to add an action. I'm going to drag the canvas to it. And it's going to, we're doing config remap. So here I accidentally did more than one, so let's go ahead and select the ones we don't need. So unfortunately, within Unity, you can't make this into a num. It has to be one of the regular data types like int, float, or string, or char. Because of that, I can't make this my enum controls.button action. I really wish I could, but I can't. So for now, we just have to say 0 and then 1. Let's go here for 2, 3, and finally 4. And then let's go ahead and start it. Null object not set to instance of reference. Config start. So I can't find car controls. Why can't I find car controls? Because I didn't drag my prefab car controls into our scene. Oops. Okay, so now we have our car controls that we can actually modify. File save. Let's try this again. Okay. Now we can pretty much press any of these. Let's go back to our canvas. So right now we're trying to remap up, but if we press something else like down, left, right, NAS, you'll see that the remap action actually changes. Okay, so let's go ahead and change these names to reflect what the actual controls are. In this case, it's up arrow, down, left, right, and the letter N. So to do that, we're going to create a for loop. So we're going to say for int action equals, and once again we're going to use our controls dot button action dot up, because we started with up. So in our for loop, we're going to use our button actions, and we're going to say we're going to start with up and go all the way to NAS. So in here, we're going to start with up. And once again, we can't exactly do an implicit conversion, so we have to say parentheses int. We have to say parentheses int before we do controls.buttonAction.up. And we're going to say until our action is less than or equal, and we're just going to copy this portion, but it's going to be until we hit NAS, because NAS is our last part of our enum. and I'm going to say action plus plus. So what we're going to do is we want to go through all of our button labels and put in what our keys are for each of these labels. So we're going to say button label action dot text is going to be equal to our card controls dot button, and whichever our action we're trying to look for dot key. Okay, so once again we can't do an implicit type conversion, so we have to add in our nice little function called toString, which will convert any integer or the key codes to words, essentially. So we're going to hit File, Save, and then we're just going to hit Play. So wonderful. All our up, down, left, right is actually changed to what the actual keys are on the keyboard. So now we could go ahead and remap our keys. So what we're going to say is if we should remap our keys, we are going to look for our button inputs. So we're going to do another loop again for int action equals, and now we want to know what is the start of all the buttons that we want to look for. Well, in order to find out which buttons to look for, we're going to create a dummy variable so that we could sort of peek into our key code function. So we're going to say public key code, and we're just going to call it temp for now. And what will this do, or what this will do, is if we go into our config script, we'll see that we have temp, and this will give us all our key codes that we need. We're going to see what's our beginning one. So our beginning key code is going to be backspace. And if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we're going to see what our ending key code is. And there's a lot of key codes here. And joystick 3, joystick 4, joystick 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so here's the last one. Joystick 8, button 19. So our key code starts with backspace and ends with joystick 8, button 19. So now that we have the range, we could then delete our temp variable, and we're going to say for int action key code dot backspace action less than equal key code dot what was it, joystick. Okay, I'm just gonna select this one just because I know I need to modify it for joystick 8 button 19 action plus plus. Once again, we also get the implicit you cannot implicitly convert. So I have to make sure that I convert this back into an int so that I can use it. But I'm going to go through all of my key codes from the very beginning to the very end, and I'm going to look for my button presses. So if my input dot get key is going to be action, then I want to do something. And once again, I can't convert it into a string, so I need to convert this action back into a key code so that it works within the input.get key. So I'm going to say parentheses key code. So now that I get rid of that error message at the bottom. So now once I detect that the user pressed a button, I want to change my car control. Yeah, so let's go ahead and go to car controls. And which car control, oops, not car controls. We're going to say car controls.button. And which button do we want to remap? Well, we stored that into our remap action variable. So this is the action that we want to remap. And it's going to be equal to whatever key code that we put in here. So this is going to be ecode, or equal to, or actually, I forgot. All our key codes are stored into a variable key. So it's going to be, put that into a key code called action. Let's see. So we cannot implicitly convert type but action to int. So it looks like our remap action is giving us this error message of the implicit conversion. Because remap action, if you remember up here, is an enum type. So you can't do an enum for an array, so you have to sort of typecast that back into an int. And that gets rid of that error message. So we're going to hit save. And now, if we hit play and go to our car controls, if we press this button and we select a new button, say W, we'll look in here and we see that our up is actually remapped to W. The only problem is it actually didn't reflect anywhere onto the screen. Also, if you press any of these, there's actually no visual indication that you are remapping anything. But we know if we go into our canvas and we click on any of these things and you look on this right hand side, you can see that we are going to the field to modify something. So now we need to give the user a visual feedback that we are indeed trying to modify something. Because visually, if you just look at the game window, the user doesn't know what's going on. So now let's go ahead and give the user that visual feedback. So what we want to do is we're going to look at the button label, and we're going to remap action, and we want the text to read something like, I don't know, press a key. So whatever action we're trying to remap, we want to make that text say press a key so that the user knows that we're going to modify something. And also, after we say change the key, we need to, first of all, make the variable should remap. We're going to make it false because after we map a key, we don't need to remap any other keys. And also, we need to be able to show the user what the new key should be. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to copy this line and we're going to paste it up here. Or actually, yeah. And we are going to say that this is going to be our new key code. So we're going to take this variable, we're going to paste it in, and we're going to say toString. So what does this mean? This means that after we remap our button, we want to replace the text to update the user what our new button is, and hit save. Now let's go ahead and go back, hit play, and let's see if it works. So if we press the up arrow, it says press a key. Wonderful. Now we press W. Index is out of range. Why is my index out of range? Let's go back. Oh, sorry. Okay, so we want to change our label for the key that we want to remap, the text, to our key that we need. Okay. So yeah, sorry. Instead of calling it action, because action was referring to this for loop, we needed to actually change it to remap action. So let's go ahead and go back, hit play. And now we do up arrow and press W. We know up is W now. Down could be S, A, D, and maybe NAS might be my enter key. So now we have our basic remap functionality. T, G, F, H, space. Okay. Now that we have this functionality, we sort of need a way to go back to the car prototype. So let's go ahead and create a button. Let's go back to our canvas. Let's duplicate one of the buttons. And I'm just going to drag this over to the right. And let's see. We'll call this car prototype. And we'll just modify this instead of up text, we'll just call it text. So yeah, my button names aren't really pretty, but you guys could rename it to what it should be to give it a more meaningful name. So let's go ahead and create another script that will be able to get me out of this. Let's see. That will be able to get me out of this configuration screen back into the car prototype scene. So I'm just gonna say load scene, and we'll say public load string scene. Oops. Okay, so in order to load between two scenes, we need to use our new scene management. That scene management. Okay. Weird. That scene. So much for autocomplete. Okay. Gonna hit save. I'm gonna close Visual Studio. Let's go ahead and reopen up load scene. Okay, so I'm now waiting for Visual Studio. Okay. I'll say yes. Save. Okay. Let's try this again. Using Unity Engine. That scene management. Yay! Scene management or manager. That load scene. Save. So now we're going to take our load scene, we're going to add it to the canvas, and now for our button here, we're going to look at our car prototype. Okay. To go back to the car prototype scene, so we're going to drag in, no, I guess the canvas is already in here, but we're going to go load scene, and our scene is not here because we did not make it public. Did we? Oh, we didn't make it public. Public load. Oh. So yeah, because they're both load scene, let's go ahead and change it to a different name, C. So yeah, our function can't be the same as the class name because that means it's an initializer instead of a different function name. So I forgot a semicolon up here, so I added a semicolon. And now if we go back to scene. Where's the load scene? Must have a return type. Oh, I am really messing up. Public void load. And let's try that again. We'll say canvas. Oh, not canvas. For our button, we want to be able to load our scene. Load. Okay, why did that do that? I don't know why this pop-up box pops up at random. So confusing. Car prototype. Let's go ahead and try this out. So we'll change our keys. And let's try to go to car prototype. And we can't because we didn't add our scene to the asset bundle. Okay. So we'll go to our build settings. And let's go add our car prototype and our configuration. I'm on configuration. There we go. So we got our car prototype, configuration. Try this again. So we'll change it WSAD and go to our car prototype. And now, unfortunately, it's not working because, well, it didn't save our configuration. So it sort of defaulted back to the old one. So let's go ahead and create the save functionality into our controls. So what we're going to do is going to say public save configuration. And we also need to know how to eventually load our configuration too. Load configuration. So everything is highlighted in red because I keep on forgetting to add in a return type of void, since these functions are not returning any single type. So in order to save a configuration, we need to use what is called player prefs. So we're going to use our player prefs, and for our save, we need to set our information. So set int. And we need to set all of our buttons from up to NAS. So because of that, we actually should be using a loop to go through all our buttons from up to NAS. So let's go ahead and go back to our configuration. Say yes. And look at our for loops. So we're going to copy this for loop right here. Or actually not this for loop. We're going to copy this for loop up top here. Sorry. Because this for loop will get us to go from our up action all the way to our NAS action. And we're going to paste that in. So we're going to start from our up button and go all the way to our NAS button. And we're going to set our preference, or we're going to save our controls. So what are we going to save? So here you can call your controls anything. I'll call it controls. I'm going to say plus action. So what this will do is when it goes through the actions of actions 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's going to save this in the player prefs and call it control 0, control 1, control 2, so on and so forth. Okay, so now we want to save the name of the key to that action. So our key name is saved under button, under our action, so we know which action we want to save, And for an array, it has to be of type int, so we got to explicitly tell it that. And we're going to say what key we want. And of course, or actually, action is already an int. Sorry, action is already int, so we don't need to typecast it. But our key code cannot be converted into an int implicitly, so we just have to say int at the beginning. Okay. And let's go ahead and close our for loop. Okay, so now that we saved our action into our player prefs, we now got to do the same thing to load our player prefs, or to load our configuration. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our key, copy it, paste it. So our key now is going to equal to whatever our player prefs is, so we're going to say get int instead. So we want to be able to get our saved information. And once again, you can't implicitly convert an int to a key code, so we have to tell the compiler to typecast it into a key code. File save, and save. So now, what do we want to do? So the first thing we want to do is we want both the car prototype and the button configuration to load our new configuration. So let's go ahead and go to our config, and we're going to say car control dot load configuration. So it's always going to load our configuration from memory, and hit save. And for our car moves, we need to be able to load that configuration as well. Car controls dot load configuration. Now the important thing is when we click on this button here to go to our car prototype, we also wanted to save our configuration so that the next scene is able to load it. So I click on the plus sign to add a new thing, new functionality. Oops. So let's go ahead and drag this over. So before I load my scene, I want to make sure that I save my configuration. So our configuration is actually not in, oops, wrong one. So our configuration is actually not under the canvas, it's actually under car controls. So let's drag car controls into here, the first one. And under our controls, we need to save our configuration. And then secondly, we want to load our scene, our car prototype. Now we hit save and play. We now have our save controls, T, G, F, H, K. We'll click on car prototype, and now we could move our car with those new configurations. Okay, I have no idea what my nitrous oxide key is. Oh well. Okay, and for completion's sake, let's go back to our car prototype, and let's give it a way of navigating back to our configuration screen. So let's go ahead and duplicate this. We'll move it to the right-hand side, and we'll just call this, say, config. Okay. And now we're going to say load scene. I'll just attach it to my canvas. And from the canvas, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to make this load our configuration scene. So now we hit file save, hit play. So I could go into our config, change our key to whatever it is, go back to our car prototype, and actually use my new controls. Go back to a configuration screen, maybe change it to something else. Go back to car prototype, and yeah, there you have it. And that's how you create the mappings for the buttons. So this concludes part 2 of our tutorial. In part 3, we're going to look at the button axis. So like the left control stick has 2 axes, the D-pad has another 2 axes, and the right analog stick also has 2 axes. So that is complicated, and I'll save that for part 3. If you like what you hear or see, definitely like, subscribe, and all that stuff. And until next time, have fun and keep on creating games.